Hey guys. I thought I'd talk to you guys today about the old school Roman Empire versus the American Empire today. Just a thought. So, if you have a look at the Romans and their history, basically you'll see that the way that the Roman military worked and sort of their version of dominance over the known world at the time was that they wouldn't necessarily take over and slaughter a place or town or city, although Carthage, things like this may have happened. But generally speaking, there was a tribute. Okay, so everyone would know how big the Roman army is and how powerful it is, and really that gets attributed to many things, but one particular thing is they were very systematic. They had processes and sets of rules to do things. Okay, so they're very ordered, and in that way they were more efficient than other armies, and people were much less effective, like the old barbarians were less effective. That sort of tribal fighting was less effective against them. However, in order to take over the known world, instead of directly occupying the place, what they would do is they would just basically give a decree of some kind to the people, not the people directly, but the authorities in the area, and say, if you pay Roman tribute, then yes, you'll be allowed to live. Okay, we won't come in and destroy your town, because basically that's what we want. We want money. We want to be able to expand our empire, and if you give us money and let us expand here, then we won't have any reason to come in and destroy, the population and also your military and your authority base. So you have two choices. You can let us come in and destroy your country or your state, whatever it may be, and put our own leadership in, or you can stay in leadership and just pay us a tribute, and with certain decisions just go vote our way, do what we want rather than what you'd normally do. Okay, that was the way of the Romans, and interestingly enough, I want to draw a comparison here to what's going on in Australia. So in Australia, or in the entire world actually, pretty much in the Western world, we all have the US dollar, and we all buy into it, which is in a way a sort of tribute. And any country that is doing well without the US dollar, the US somehow finds some reason to go and invade, take it over, stage a coup, gain control of the country, and put in their own leadership that does pay this tribute. Okay, and it's exactly the same. And they call it, there's a lot more phases to the strategy now. They call it economic hitmen and things like this. And so the first idea is you send in the political opposers and you fund them really well in a country if it's democratic. But if the country isn't democratic, it happens to be a dictatorship of some kind, then they'll send in the jackals, like the assassins. If the person's trained like by the CIA, like Saddam Hussein was, then they'll actually just go into the country and kill all the leadership, take over the economy, and get their money that way. So, but this is all under the guise of, the very powerful PR mechanisms of America. So it'll never be worded this way, but that's what they do. If you just look at their behaviors, that's what they do. Now, that being the case, there are some obvious exceptions to this, like the countries that actually are big enough to oppose America. They don't do this. And this is a situation of tension that is arising between, say, Russia and China and America, because America doesn't like what they're doing, right? Offering an alternative currency that you can pay tribute to. That being the case anyway, it just shows, though, unless you're powerful enough to oppose the Roman army, you've got to go with it if they're the more immediate threat, which is what happens in all the smaller countries, including Australia. So another factor in Australia is we've actually had a residing American army for a long time, but it comes under the name of entourages. So essentially, they don't come under, hey, this is an American military occupying Australia, but rather the bases are, these are just some American troops. They're not, occupying us. They're just an entourage to help with the Australian troops. Okay. And as you can see, that is problematic in itself. Okay, the reality is that is a wordplay to get around occupying Australia, and I'm sure they do this in every country that they are occupying, including the secret bases, because they say there's 300 American bases, and then you hear about another 200 or so secret bases around the world, and this is very interesting. Now, I'm not sure if the American entourage that we have here is actually CIA, which is more like the private army of Barack Obama, whoever the president is, the corporate America CEO, which is pretty much the most powerful seat of corporation in the known world, besides maybe some of the banks, but I'm not sure if the banks come under it or vice versa. Because pretty much, well, actually, Australia is a corporation, and so are the states. Each state is sort of like a sub-company of a greater corporation. Queensland, the Premier would be the CEO, the Premier being I forgot his name now, Campbell Newman. Campbell Newman would be the CEO of Queensland, whereas Tony Abbott would be the CEO of Australia, and those are sub-companies of the greater corporation being America. Okay, and so we are occupied, and we are actually in a very interesting political position. That being the case, our politicians have to balance very delicately the interests of America and the interests of the actual Australia, because if you're in a subservient position and you cause a threat to the American established bases here and the American interests here, then you will be overthrown. Okay, and there has been coups in Australia. I think the last one, I'm not sure if it was 70s, late 70s or early 80s, but there was a coup here, and the coup was successful. And this actually brings into mind some interesting sort of political situations that we have here. One of them being the idea of the Australia Act. Now, this was put in other countries as well, but I'm pondering the idea that this is in fact heavily American influenced, and I have no basis to this yet. But like many ideas that turn out to be true, it could in fact have a lot of a very substantial amount of evidence behind it that has been sort of hidden. Well, we won't know. It's much like the Treaty of Versailles was kept in. The Treaty of Versailles, or the peace treaty after the World Wars was created, was the first document where the British recognised Australia as a separate country, which means that British law no longer applies here, right? That's according to the UN. Now, according to our domestic judges, that is not true. But, UN versus domestic judges, who are you going to go with? I'm pretty sure the UN is correct. In fact, if they're wrong, and we're not actually a separate country, then the whole idea of our international treaties collapses, and all of the economic treaties we have collapse. So I'm pretty sure, since they're standing, that means that the government who is sitting are actually in the mindset of, how shall we say, keeping the public in the dark about the very vague situation our law and judicial system is in, which happens to be that you're treating a domestic population of Australians, millions of them, who happen to I won't even use the term Australians, but if you're born here and you're not British, even if you're white, right, you're born on the land. That means that the only law that can affect you here should be the law of the land. Okay, that's not the case here. Okay, what's the case is that we've got Admiralty law that is affecting us from the British, and we're not British. So, what do I think started to cause the changes in the Australian government, so to speak? Well, if it was American interest, it would make a lot of sense. So, Initially, I'm sure there's more to this, but we had something called the Australia Act. Now, the Australia Act, this was when the Queen had the British had their thumb heavily on Australia, much more than now. And I think it's possible that American interests came in and started pushing this in each one of the European dominions, but I'm not sure. So essentially, the Australia Act came in and said that the police have a lot more power than they do to regulate. We can change certain pieces of constitution. We can take certain things out of the state constitutions. We just give all sorts of rights to politicians. We change titles and yada yada yada. A lot of stuff that the Queen herself in Britain said. She said directly, "I will not give this my signature," which is, by the way that the Queen gives a signature for a bill to become an act. You need a signature from the Queen. Okay. And the way this happens is the Queen talks to the Privy Council. The Privy Council give permission through something called a letters patent to a Premier or a Governor General to act upon. This is my understanding of it. Yeah. So that's the process for a Governor General to get permission to act upon something. Well, that didn't happen. She heard about this bill being put through, right? She said, "No, I'm not going to sign this until you hold a referendum with the Australian people about this, because it changes the way the Constitution works." And she refused to sign for it. So there was no Privy Council involved at all. Okay. Now, I'm not sure if someone frauded or committed fraud by signing on behalf of the Privy Council or not, but I know that the referendum was not held, in spite of what the Queen said. And they put through this massive piece of legislation to give them more power, in spite of what the Queen had said. Okay? So the Queen had said, don't put it through unless you hold a referendum, right? Because the Constitution can't be changed without a referendum. So, and nor things in the Constitution. So, and this is including the covering clauses and many other parts of the Constitution that most people don't even know about. But okay, so they all get changed without a referendum, which is treason. So then, once that's in, I think that was, they get all this power, and the states are again at this point, because by the way, prior to this, the states were getting insanely powerful and sort of eyeing each other off in terms of they were very mistrustful of each other because everyone was in a power grab, and we're in the same situation now where the states are very much overpowered. Then the same government tries to put through a referendum where they grab for more power, and basically they ask whether we recognise local council or not. And they had another question in another referendum about this, but basically Australia said no twice in a row for local government. Well, not in a row, but twice, 2 different referendums. We said no, and then we said no again. And then they tried to use the legislation they put through, being the Australia Act, and the backdoors in legislation that they had created, probably through plebiscites, but I'm not sure, in order to actually gain the control they wanted in anyway. So, how does this relate now? Well, I think all 3 of the last prime ministers have actually tried to put in or have a referendum about local council again, which we said no to. A local government, which we said no to. And essentially, each time they've been given a no from the Senate or some sort of authority. In one case, the Sydney Governor General's Attorney's Office, this is what I think there was a case in the High Court about this. The Sydney Governor General's Attorney's Office actually sent a letter to the lower house saying, don't hold the referendum on local council because it brings up the issue that actually they don't exist legally. Local government, Now, there is some interpretations of this which says the state doesn't exist anymore, if you're looking at pure law, but I'm not really sure how to interpret it. I just know that that is the type of thing that they were trying to avoid by stopping the new referendum on those subjects. So on this American fact, by giving these states independent power and a lot more of it, in a way it separates from the protections that the British afforded us. And this is actually very self-evident in the fact that before these sorts of things went through, we were very much protected by English law. Okay, and because the English law had the human rights written into it, whereas the Australian law doesn't. So when they separated us using the Titles and Something Act, I can't remember the term for it, but it was Titles and Something. It's in the Australia Act. There are about 30 pieces of legislation that went through with the Australia Act. It's one big chunk. And in one of them, it separates the Queen of England from the Queen of Australia and also the laws. So essentially, we're stuck without any human rights because of this crap that went through illegally. And I think this may have very much to do with the occupation of America. There's also some maritime law around 1973 that came out that may have something to do with it. But essentially, how does it serve the British if they lose control of a colony or a dominion at the time? I don't think it does. So it suggests to me that there's some sort of a fight over the powers of government here. And I think it might be between the British and the Americans. The other thing is, and this is just another side topic, that if you've ever heard of the Glass-Steagall Act, I think, I'm not too sure, but I think that isn't applying in Australia, which is the removal of the Glass-Steagall was actually something that affected Americans greatly, and I think it's happened here. What it does is basically there's a separation between the types of holdings that banks can do, where one is just savings, and the banks are allowed to mess with savings because they're just savings, they've got to be kept secure. Whereas investment money, investment accounts, they can do what they want with and chuck it on trading accounts and yada yada, or whatever else they want to put it on, provided that they've got the right security rating or whatever within the stock markets and within the bond markets. So that's what a Glass-Steagall does. It separates those two. I don't know why the term is there. Maybe it's the name of the guy, Steagall, I'm not sure. But essentially, with that removed, you get a situation where the banks are spending the savings of the people in the country on whatever the hell they want, like whatever investments they want, no matter how dodgy they are, which caused the collapse, very much so, of the American economy, because they were spending people's savings, or unbeknownst to them, on dodgy real estate, which comes through a whole lot of forms of fraud and all this sort of stuff. So basically they took this crappy real estate, which in order to actually sell it, you'd have to do hundreds of thousands of dollars of work, or tens of thousands, and they called it a high quality investment, whoever they are, and then that was sold on the market as a AAA investment. Okay, a very safe investment, very conservative investment, which of course was bullshit, because if you actually bought the thing, you would be in debt a lot of money, and you would make no money on it unless you put more money into it. So, which, that amongst other things started to collapse the society. That and the endless printing of money, the whole idea of the financial stimulus or whatever it was, just printing a lot of money, which drops the dollar value and makes work worth less. Because if your money's worth less but you're being paid the same, it means that you have to work more hours for the same products. And they just printed money nonchalantly. Now, the point is that looks like where the Australian economy is going, unfortunately. Now, we've got a lot more protections than those people. That's why when the general global financial crisis hit, Australia was very least affected. But if you look at the current policies that are going through, they're very much like the American policies, even to the extent where if you actually have a careful look at it, at the differences between, say, Australia, America, and other countries, you'll find that we have a lot more similarities financially now with America, and particularly since Tony Abbott's come in. This is because of, I think, the point of view of some hybrid of of free market capitalism with the Reserve Bank, and it's funny when that fails because people blame it on free market capitalism, which is interesting because they don't blame it on the giant secret tax of the Reserve Bank being interest rates. They blame it on the free market being the only way to consistently add value and measure the quality of the value that you're adding so that you can improve, right? That's it, the only known way. And they blame it on that rather than the giant super tax. Maybe it's the giant super tax. Just saying. So we get put into this situation where, say for example, it's going to take 30 years for the average student now to pay off their loans, thanks to Abbott and the government that is in now. 30 years, right? Guess what? Germany, it's free. Free. Now, the German economy isn't much bigger than ours. They're at 1.6 trillion GDP, whereas we're at 1.5 trillion. So the claim that that we can't afford it is bullshit. Of course we can afford it. The question is, what are the values of the government at the moment? Well, they're not serving the interests of the people. It's very non-progressive. It's very serving the globalist agenda. And when I say globalist, most people don't even know what that means. They think, oh, it's conspiracy. But what it is, if you have a international corporation and you allow them to do business in a country, right, you have to be very careful about one thing, which is that the interests of your people are served. And the reason why is because the people in that company are not seeing the effect the policies of their business are having on those people, so they feel no empathy towards them. Okay? And that's a very real effect. I mean, it's like if you go hire a company, and we'll call them X Shop, and you hire X Shop, right? And they make shoes, or they sew shoes, okay, and they're overseas. Well, if they're a sweatshop, you won't know, but because they're multinational, they're not going to tell you where they get doing this stuff. They're going to give you some other bullshit, and you have no way to make sure that the people who are being paid for this product are not being exploited. And that's really the problem with globalization, is that it decentralizes in one way the effect of what you're doing from your empathy, and then on the other hand, it centralizes the profits all in one business, because if they do that all over the world, they have all these different sweatshops and underpaid people, hence that they make billions. And that's why globalization can be bad. And also, how does a farmer compete with someone who's being underpaid? So if you have some sort of international fruit company, right, and you're coming into the country with bananas at, say, $1 a kilo or less, right? How does one compete with that when we've got to pay $20 an hour per, picker or whatever, and they've got to pick tons and tons of bananas. There's no competition there, which is why it was a bad idea to remove any form of balance that we put in to make sure that people weren't underpaid here, which would have been some sort of tariffs that we had, which we removed in order to, as Abbott puts it, we're open for business. That's what that means. We're open for exploitation. And actually that has a lot to do with the trade agreements, which says that there's no minimum wage for that international companies have to pay the workers. Okay, so that way they can exploit people, and we can be competitive with slave labor. That's what it really means. Do we want that? Of course not. But people don't understand the impact of globalization and those sort of things. And by the way, it's not a dirty word. Okay, can you globalize while maintaining the quality of life for people? Absolutely. And the way you do it is by setting standards within a national base for the quality of life of your people, and having self-sufficiency to the point where you can refuse to provide a service in competition with slave labor. And you go, no, we don't need it, we can support ourselves until you guys pay what we want for our people. We can do that. That's not what we're doing, but we can do that. Another thing is, like, how do you avoid conflict if you're trying to create a slave labor competitive market? Well, one such brilliant way is you essentially remove the educated middle class. Okay, so you get rid of the middle class, as much of them as possible. And how would you do that? Well, it's by doing the 30-year loan. So anyone who wants to get an education has to now pay back their money for 30 years. Not many people will go into university with that in mind. Okay, not many people are going to want to, in comparison. I'm going to be paying this back for 30 years. I don't really want a university education, thus keeping the people uneducated, which allows them to be manipulated into this sort of poorly paid environment, which doesn't serve them. Okay, and that's very intentional. Now, we don't need that. Okay, but that's the way we're going from the influences of globalization and predominantly the American market. All right, cheers, guys. Thanks for your time. Bye.